Welcome back, guys, to the second week of our Atypical study. If you remember from last week, we talked about Cain and Abel and how their relationship went sour, but God still redeemed that family no matter what kind of dysfunction they had, because Jesus ultimately can redeem every family from any amount of dysfunction. Well, we're going to continue to see that this week. So, to recap where we are going to be at now, we're talking about a guy named Abraham. Let me get you from where we were last week to now. So we skip over 19 generations from Genesis 4 to Genesis 22. So we see that God provides Seth to Adam and Eve. We discussed that briefly last week. And through the line of Seth, we saw guys like Abraham, David, Solomon, and eventually Jesus. That was mentioned. But from Seth down to Abraham, we see guys like Enoch, Methuselah, the guy who lived the longest in Scripture, as we see recorded, 969 years. We see Noah, we see his 3 sons, and now we're at Abraham. And if you know anything about Abraham, let me set the stage for you. Abraham was chosen by God to eventually be the father of many nations. You guys know the song, Father Abraham had many sons, that song. That's why we sing it, because God literally told Abraham, I will make you the father of many nations. I will make a great nation out of you. The issue is that Abraham's really old when God makes that promise. He's in his 90s. And his wife, Sarah, she's in her 80s. So they've been married for a long time, and they have had no children. And in the eyes of their friends, God hadn't blessed them yet because they had no children. And so Abraham's thinking, okay, God, I see what you're saying here, but I don't see how I'm supposed to become a great nation when I have no kids. And there are some things that Abraham does wrong. There are some things where he goes, okay, so God's going to make a great nation of me, but he hasn't done it yet. Well, I got to do something about it. And so he makes some bad decisions. But God is not going to forget his promise. And so then, after a long period of waiting, God gives them Isaac. Abraham is 100 years old, and Sarah is 90 when she gives birth to Isaac. If you guys know anything about Isaac, he's the only child that Abraham and Sarah had. He is their son. He will carry on the family lineage. And they see him as this grand blessing. God, you are faithful. You said you would make us a great nation, and you have now given us a child who can then help make this promise be fulfilled. He can help fulfill the great nation by being able to have kids of his own. Well, now we're at a bit of a rut. So let's get into our Bible story today. We are in Genesis chapter 22, and we'll be going from verse 1 through verse 14. So let's start here. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham! And Abraham said, Here am I. God said to Abraham, Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. Hold on. I have to sacrifice my son? How are you going to fulfill your promise now, God? He has to be thinking that. But it doesn't say that in Scripture. Look here at verse number 3. God finishes talking about the burnt offering, and the very next thing. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. He didn't ask a question. He didn't say, God, are you sure? He didn't say, this doesn't seem like a good idea. He didn't say, hey, you're going back on your promise. He just obeyed, which is radical. In my heart, I feel like Abraham had to be thinking some of those things of like, wait, how is God going to fulfill his promise now? He had to have been thinking it, but he didn't act on it. He didn't rebuke God. He didn't say, God, you're wrong. He just obeyed. And so skip down a little bit. They take a long journey. They have to go about 3 days from where they lived to this land, Moriah. And eventually, they get to this place where God has instructed Abraham, hey, this is Mount Moriah, in the land of Moriah. You're going to go up this mountain, just you and Isaac, and you're going to sacrifice your son. And Abraham just says, okay, Lord, I will do it. So The young men stay down with the donkey. Abraham and Isaac go out with the wood, and they start preparing the altar. Then Isaac says, Father, I see that we have fire, and I see that we have wood, but where's the lamb? We need to sacrifice a lamb. And he's confused. He's trying to figure out what Abraham's doing here. And Abraham offers these words in response. These amazing, amazing words. God will provide. God will provide. That's a lot of faith when God says, go sacrifice your son, and Abraham just is like, okay, you will provide. That's a lot of faith. I don't know if I have that kind of faith. I don't have a son, so I can't exactly be tested on that level, but I know for sure if God asked me to sacrifice one of my best friends or one of my siblings, I don't know if I'd be able to do it. The first words out of my mouth would probably be, are you sure? Do you have a better plan? Oof, how bad would that be if I asked God, do you have a better plan? Oh man, he would not be happy with me. But let's keep going. So they get to the place. Isaac has already asked about the wood. And so then Abraham places Isaac onto the altar. And Isaac's now already thinking, okay, I know that we had the wood. I know that my father has the fire. We still don't have the lamb. It looks like I'm the lamb. I guess it's me. I don't know why we're doing this, but he's my dad, so I'm going to listen to him, and I'm going to obey him. And so as Abraham's raising up the knife, and he's preparing to kill his son, what? Stops. It stops as he's preparing to do it. The angel of God grabs the wrist of Abraham, and he says, Abraham. And Abraham says, yes. And the angel of the Lord, do not lay your hand on the boy, or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. So God sees Abraham's faithfulness, and he sees, wow, he did it. He was obedient. God knew that he would be obedient, because we then see there's a ram caught in a bunch of thorns. Abraham looks over and he realizes God provided. And he knows he doesn't have to kill Isaac anymore. He knows that he can take Isaac off of the altar, go take the ram, put the ram on the altar, and then sacrifice the ram to God. Because Abraham obeyed God. God provided. I don't think that God's calling us to do something as extreme as killing our friends or killing our siblings or our family members. I think God's calling us to do something much greater. He's calling us to just flat out obey him. He's calling us to, in the worst of situations, look up and say, God, you will provide. I guarantee he's not trying to call us to do something super radical in the same way like Abraham, but he's probably calling us to do something super radical in a different way. He's calling us to text that friend that we haven't texted in weeks. He's calling us to spend time with our families for maybe another month. Who knows how much longer this quarantine will last? Who knows how much longer we'll be stuck with a stay-at-home order? Who knows what it's going to be like once things even start opening up? We don't know. But he's calling us to live in a radical time right now and to still be radical disciples for him. He is still calling us to follow his instructions, to obey him. And sometimes we have to be like Abraham, where we just have to say, okay, God, I'll listen to you. And sometimes we have to be like Isaac, and we have to say, okay, Mom, okay, Dad, I don't understand what you're doing, but I know that you have my best interests at heart, so I'll follow along with it. And in the midst of this season of life, where we're still trying to figure out what our new normal is, let me encourage you guys to ask these questions of yourself. What promises has God been keeping in your life? What promises did he make to you that he is still keeping? Is he maybe even fulfilling these promises? And have you been able to recognize that? And then let's flip it on our own selves. Have you been making promises to people? Have you been making promises to God? And are you fulfilling those promises? Are you keeping them? Or are you struggling? And if you are struggling, how do we get better? How do we improve? at keeping our promises? We'll talk more about that tonight when we have our discussion, and we will see you guys then.